Okay, great. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Self-Wired. We have a new book for you today. What we're going to be going through is part one of Thinking Fast and Slow. Landon has it up there by Daniel Kahneman. Very popular book in recent times, has gotten a lot of great reviews and uh, given our interest in psychology and understanding how the mind works and how decisions are made and what affects our thinking and our being in the world. This would be a great book to dive into and kind of walk along with you through that journey. So, Landon, thanks for being back. Let's go ahead and dive right into this thing.
Sounds good. Yeah, just a quick format. We're going to go through the main components of part one, and then at the end, we're just going to have a discussion about part one as a whole. So, yeah, if you're interested in sticking around for the whole thing, or if you are merely interested in getting the aspects of the out of the book that you're interested in, it's totally up to you here. So. Here we go. So system one operates automatically and quickly with little or no effort and sense of voluntary control. So this is just an automatic process. You can think of it as happening to you, kind of like a force of nature. But system two is kind of what we consider to be ourselves. This is the effort that we expend in an attempt at coming to a conclusion for ourselves as opposed to kind of a reflex or an instinct. So system two allocates attention to the effortful mental activities that demand it, including complex computations. The operations of system two are often associated with the subjective experience of agency, choice, and concentration. So here's an example of kind of what system one feels like. So if I ask you bread and, you'd say butter. It's automatically, you've heard that a million times. You don't have to expend any kind of effort in attempting to answer that question. Bread and what goes with it, butter. System two, on the other hand, would be something along the lines of reciting your phone number. It takes a little more effort. You've got to recite, you got to pull your number from your long-term memory and convert it into consciousness and then recite it in the order that it comes out of. It's a little bit harder to do. So system one is stereotypes, system two, statistics, right? So an example in the book is, what kind of career would someone with a meek and tidy soul have? An answer a lot of people would give is a librarian. But if you look at the statistics of that, they might not necessarily support that answer, because in order to have a statistical analysis of personality traits and careers, you would have to, understand the amount of librarians in the area, understand the amount of, so you'd have to understand the amount of librarians, you'd have to understand the amount of other careers, know the amount of libraries in the area, and then you'd have to kind of, you'd have to interview a huge sample of librarians to understand what kind of personality trait they actually have. Maybe they're different outside of work than they are inside of work. Maybe someone like a farmer is more likely to be meek and tidy than a librarian. You haven't done the analysis, you don't know, but you use this kind of stereotype of what a librarian appears to be inside of the culture that you reside in. On the other hand, something like, so go ahead.
Oh, you can go ahead and finish that. What were you going to say?
Okay, I was just going to say, on the other hand, something like 2 + 2 is 4. 17 times 84, you might need a pencil and a paper to solve that problem. Even if you did, you're going to have to utilize more energy in order to come to the conclusion of whatever the answer is. I'm not going to try to come to that answer. My system two is allocated to presenting these slides right now. System one is impulsive. System two, on the other hand, monitors behavior in order to keep your impulsivity to a minimum. If you've ever been in a social situation where it would be inappropriate to insult someone, you find yourself biting your tongue, that's your system 2 telling you not to go ahead with the immediate impulse that you have of whatever, taboo comment you want to make. So this is system 1 uses what Kahneman describes as the law of least effort, right? We don't really want to work hard. We tend to be a little bit lazy. So in a situation where you don't need to expend very much energy to come to a conclusion, you're just going to use system 1. You're not going to check your work with system 2. But when the situation requires that you do check your work, you're going to use that system 2. So in conclusion, system 1 automatic, system 2 effortful. Easiest way to think about it.
Yeah, and just go back there for a second. Something you'll hear reoccurring as we go through this book is, we is understanding this in evolutionary terms. So if we take system 1 and system 2, we can understand these as two components of how our brains are how our brains are developed, how our thinking is developed. System 1 is like the more innate, primal, instinctual aspects of our thinking, where we are concerned um, primarily with the maintenance of energy. So if you think about, if you'd seen our review on The Body Keeps the Score, you know that the brain is organized into 3 different levels. Or it can be conceptualized as being 3 different levels. You have the reptilian, the mammalian, and then you have this neocortex that sits on top of these older structures. And reverting into those lower order parts of the brain are primarily concerned with maintaining energy, maintaining the lowest state of energy. And so in doing that, what you do, how that plays out in the world, is you act instinctually, you act unconsciously, because you already have these built-in programs from your ancestors to perceive your environment in a certain way. And even in your own individual life, over repeated experiences, you begin to have these more instinctual, automatic responses. And so it becomes less effort to use that system, whereas system 2 is more like the neocortex that comes in, our thinking faculty, our faculty for logic and reason, and being able to control our environment. That requires a lot of energy, hence why we have such a large cortex. It's because we have developed this capacity to control our environment and to control our impulses when necessary. But again, that requires a lot of energy. And so what you have to ultimately do is find a state between these two, the state of optimal performance, which has been termed as the flow state, because you're optimizing your performance, but it isn't necessarily that you're focused excessively to where you feel as though you're straining yourself. Because say after you take, say you have a test, an exam you just took, you're going to feel drained after doing that. Whereas if you're in a flow state doing something like dancing or surfing or playing music, whatever it might be, you feel actually energized after the event. You feel like you've gained energy from something. And so it's finding that balance between these two states that you're going to see is what you're trying to attain by understanding these two systems. So anyways, continuing.
Thank you for that contribution. All right. So here we have some examples of some more concrete examples of system 1 and system 2. So if you're looking at this picture to the left, you're immediately aware that this woman's angry. You don't have to look at her and go, okay, eyebrows narrowed, her mouth is construed in a little bit of a snarl. I can see that by the lines on her nostril. She looks like she might say something. No, it's immediate. This woman's angry. She might yell something, even attack me. You don't have to expend any sort of effort. You don't have to utilize any other aspect of your brain outside of this primitive response to seeing the prime example of what an angry woman looks like. You know right off the bat, right? But it gets a little more interesting when system 2 comes online. So I'm sure a lot of viewers will be aware of this study if you're interested in psychology whatsoever. You've seen this study. Participants are asked to watch this video, and in the video, they're it's requested of them to count the amount of balls that are passed between two people wearing, or three or four people wearing black shirts, right? So if it's passed to the white shirted person, you don't count that pass. If it's passed to a black shirted person, you do. And so it's a little hard. You have to track and count the ball passes as well as the color of the shirt. This is system 2, allocating effort, allocating energy, and allocating glucose to watching and counting balls pass. And in the middle of this study, this person wearing a gorilla suit comes out and beats their chest. And the surprising aspect of this is a lot of people, about 50%, give or take, will miss the gorilla altogether. This is something that if you were just watching the video, you weren't counting passes, you would see that gorilla 100% of the time. However, when attention is allocated to system 2 and your attention is focused on the task at hand, you can miss this very obvious interaction that happens on the screen. The cause of this is typically system 1, that automatic process that sees something like a facial expression or knows what 2 + 2 equals, is kind of sleeping. It's not really necessarily aware that it needs to be focused on an unexpected event happening, right? So what you'll see is it's kind of an either or scenario. A lot of the time you're not going to have system 1 and system 2 online at the same time. If you're using system 2, system 1 has taken a back seat. But if you're just kind of immediately responding to a situation, system 1 is the thing doing the work, or not doing the work, would be a better way to put it.
Yeah, I think just something quick to point out, or like to speculate about with that experiment. We kind of talked about this before, where it's interesting to kind of consider at what expense does system 2 preside over system 1, because you can think of system 1 as this like the ground on top of which system 2 stands. So like you take if you take an example where, like, say you're counting rocks, on the trail, and you have to count a certain number of rocks that are a certain color, and you're doing that, and then there's a snake there. That's going to, now that it's in your actual environment as opposed to being on screen where there's a perceived threat, system 1 might prevent you from being able to continue with that task. However, say that task is mandated, is necessary for you to save the life of your child, despite the snake or snakes being on that trail. That is more like that is a higher order faculty in which system 2 is able to think about that and see the importance and go through the danger, the immediate danger, to save the child.
Right. Yeah. System 1 or system 2 in certain circumstances can hijack one another. They can go, okay, I'm coming online now. I'm going to be the instinct that takes hold, in system 1's case, over system 2. And so, yeah, you see that in the example you're given of the example that Noah gave of kind of a life or death, high stakes situation where logically thinking your way through something isn't necessarily going to be the best course of action. But when system 1 is kind of turned into something that's obsolete, and it's not going to help you, like in the case of multiplying 2 or 3 digit numbers, system 1, it's useless. So system 2 kind of hijacks that and comes online. But yeah.
It isn't necessarily that it's useless. In fact, system 1 could even probably like propel you in your goal. You know what I mean? It could help to because given like the like the biochemical response to like a stressful situation, it gives you energy, um, and it prepares you for an event. So that's kind of, I guess, in a sense, how you could think about working to attain a flow state where you learn to control that stress response, um, in a certain environment with
Right.
exposure to it.
But system two, like in the example you gave of like a dangerous poisonous animal being in front of you,
Yeah.
logically think that's this breed of snake, if it bites me this will happen, not going to help you. Even if it's not a dangerous snake and it appears to be, system one is going to come online and say, listen, we don't need to retrieve our snake information out of our long-term memory and utilize that. We're just going to respond to this situation. System two is obsolete at that point. It doesn't matter the statistical probability of surviving the snake bite, the color or the gender of the snake. None of that matters. What matters is the primitive response, understanding snake equals danger, danger equals respond this way. That happens before you're even necessarily conscious of what you're doing. Like Kahneman gives an example of like hydroplaning. Before you understand, okay, my car is hydroplaning because it's raining, I need to respond in this way in order to save my own life. You respond automatically. There isn't any kind of higher order thinking going on in this response to a dangerous event. So yeah, I think in some cases um, they can kind of work together, but in a lot of the time, one of them is utilized and the other is deemed obsolete in a lot of circumstances.
Right, right.
All right, so this is a pretty interesting discovery that Kahneman did a lot of his own research on in a lab. So in these studies, they would have people kind of strapped into a chair, and they'd be peering into the eyes of these people uh, and asking them pretty hard questions, questions that would require system two to come online, and system two would be needed in order to come to the correct decision, right? And so what they find is that while people are doing this, the pupil dilates. So they can watch this person and they can infer what's going on in their head and going, okay, yeah, this person's trying to solve this multiplication problem. I can see their pupil dilating as a result of energy expenditure. Likewise, they could see when that person gave up. So, this person's kind of, they've had about enough. They're getting kind of taxed. They give up. Kahneman could say to them, why did you give up just now? And they'd go, what do you mean? Like, how did you know that I had stopped attempting to come to the conclusion of the correct answer? And you could say, well, your pupil got smaller. It's this very clear sign of energy expenditure. And in a similar vein, he gives an analogy of, if you're trying to light a light bulb in your house and the electrical wiring is only going to pull the amount of energy that it needs to light the light bulb. It's not going to give all the energy it has towards this one task, only the amount that the light bulb needs to turn on, right? In a similar way, our brains, while we are attempting to complete a task, only utilize the amount of energy that we need to complete the task, no more. So you can think about this as, if I hold a gun to your head and I tell you memorize the number 9462, your life depends on it. You're literally only going to be able to utilize the amount of energy that it requires to memorize those 4 digits, and your pupils probably aren't even going to dilate. It's going to be relatively easy to hold those memories in, even though it's a life or death situation. It doesn't matter. You're not going to be able to utilize all of your energy in the way that you would utilize all of your energy and all of your focus to multiply 2-digit numbers. You only get the amount of energy you need. It's interesting to note that, you know, you don't really have control over that. You can't exert yourself to memorize 4 digits. You can only, like I said, utilize the amount of information that you have. So this is uh you know, it's termed, you know, like the allocation of attention, right? And he gives a little bit of information on how this ability to designate attention and focus is correlated with higher levels of intelligence, but it's not necessarily the same thing. So, you know, they do studies where air traffic controllers are more equipped to keep their attention on the task at hand, but that is a predictor of attention more so than intelligence. And it's also interesting to note that people who are more intelligent are able to allocate less energy to the solving of a problem. So, in other words, it takes less energy for an intelligent person to multiply 2-digit numbers than it would for a less intelligent person. They have to pull less energy from their nervous system, and yeah, they utilize less information for the same, or less, I'm sorry, they utilize less energy for the same task.
Yeah, it doesn't graft on like entirely perfect, but again, you can take system one and system two and relate system one as the parasympathetic response of your nervous system, which is like the rest and digest. In the system, in the system two is the sympathetic response. It's like the fight or flight, the energizing state. The reason I say that is because, like in this case of solving the problem, the math problem, your system two is activated, and hence why your pupils dilate, because that's a sign of a sympathetic response to have a better understanding of what's going on in your environment. Think about if a lion's about to attack you, your pupils will dilate because you're looking for ways to escape or even to fight back. So you have to have a maximal view of your surrounding environment. So, but that is just a manifestation of our past environment and today, because you don't need the pupils, you don't need to be able to see your environment totally to have it to solve a complex math problem, but that is one way we can measure it. And so you have the sympathetic response in system two, and system one is the parasympathetic, where we want to maintain this state of energy conservation of sleep. You can think sleep is like sleep is this primordial condition from which we arose. If you think about consciousness arising out of unconsciousness, over time, you can think of sleep and unconsciousness, that lowered state. That is the state our bodies seek to maintain. However, more and more over time, we're finding ways to consciously invest or enhance our energy levels, and to increase our focus and increase our awareness, our consciousness, um, and growing our awareness of the world and how we think. Hence why Daniel Kahneman wrote this book, and why we have this understanding of these two systems in the first place. How are we even able to conceptualize these two systems? That is a result of increased energy over time, being able to understand not only our outside environment but our inner environment, how we function as human beings. And so it was just that's just a quick analogy to the window of the soul of system one and system two.
Well, yeah, that segues nicely into this next slide slash chapter of understanding this energy expenditure in the light of glucose. So, first of all, like I'll just go over the experiments that were presented in this chapter, and then just kind of go over a few more interesting few more interesting experiments, total of 4 experiments that highlight this glucose expenditure. So in the first one, people were asked to watch a film. And in the course of this film, they were asked to monitor this person's behavior. And they were going to kind of answer questions afterwards. So while they were monitoring this behavior, words would flash on the screen. And typically, system one, if you're looking at this slide, you read mental work without any effort. You just kind of see that and read it automatically. It's not really something that you do. It's something that it's a task that you perform out of habit, and you're not doing much in order to accomplish that task. So if I were to ask you not to read those words, it's going to take a little more effort to kind of keep your eyes averted and ignore them. So that's what these people were attempting to do, is ignore a habit of reading words automatically. And while they were doing this, one group was given lemonade spiked with glucose. Another was given lemonade sweetened with Splenda. So these people are drinking their lemonade. The people that were given more glucose afterwards, when they were answering questions, were less likely to give intuitive responses, right? So these intuitive responses that would typically come out of system one with no work, they were less willing to give those out because they had energy to expend on system two properties. They were more willing to kind of look at the intuitive response and then ignore that and give a response that would require more effort. So this is just kind of going to show, in the same way that while you're working out, if you have fat or glucose or carbohydrates that you can expend in the name of energy, you're going to give more effort while you're working out. You're going to give up slower than someone who has less energy. And this is a little bit more scary of an example of this. They performed a experiment in which they monitored Israeli judges and their willingness to give parole. So these judges were, they have a long day. They have a lot of parole hearings. On average, they spend about 6 minutes per hearing, giving a average of 35% of these parolees, giving about 35% of these people requesting parole, 35% on average, right? After a meal, the judges go, they eat breakfast or whatever, they come back, that spikes to about 65%. Before a meal, when these judges are hungry, it drops down to about 0%. So what we're seeing here is these judges running out of glucose, right? So when they run out of glucose, they're utilizing their system one and they're making quick judgments. And a lot of the time, they're not making very nice judgments at all. The thing that's easiest for them to do, which is deny parole, they're doing almost 100% of the time. However, when they have glucose and they have the energy that's needed in order to contemplate the case before them, they're more willing to devote more energy to understanding this. So just a quick synopsis, you'll give up quicker if you run out of glucose to send to system two, right? So it's kind of like if your power is going out, your light bulb kind of flickers and then it's out, right? It doesn't have the energy needed to keep it bright. However, if you send energy to it, it comes back online. It's the easiest way to think about it. No energy, no system two. System one comes online because it doesn't require as much energy.
Yeah, you can think about that at the end of the day. You're less likely. Well, actually, ultimately depends if you're a morning person or a night person. But for most people, at the end of the day, um, you're less likely to complete tasks that have a certain deadline or work tasks at night than you are in the morning. And that's a simple fact of the physiological fatigue you feel at the end of the day. And in that case, and that's why your self-control is inhibited at night, which is why you have to like monitor. It's a good idea to monitor like staying away from junk food at night, because it's easier to do that at nighttime than it is when you wake up in the morning.
Yeah, and so that point right there is highlighted by a couple other studies that they did. We're not just talking about glucose here. We're also talking about attention and like the utilization of one of these systems. So in this study, participants were asked, okay, keep this 7-digit number in your head, right? You got to memorize this 7-digit number. So most likely what they were doing is kind of like repeating this 7-digit number over and over and over again, allocating a lot of attention, energy to system 2 in order to keep that 7-digit number inside of their head. And then while they were doing that, they were given the choice between, let's say, a salad and a chocolate cake. Participants who were using this energy to memorize this 7-digit number were more likely to choose the chocolate cake. And this is because system 2 is busy, as Kahneman would say. So system 2 is being utilized. And so this system 1 that's kind of, it's the word I'm looking for, it's kind of impulsive. System 1 is going like, screw the diet, I want the chocolate cake. So, and it has the right to do that because system 2 is busy. This thing that would monitor behavior and stick to the healthier choice is off doing something else.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it wants the cake because it wants the energy density of the cake. The cake is rich in both fat and carbohydrate, which are both energy sources that your brain is craving because you've been utilizing your self-control so much, which again is a more metabolically expensive process.
Right. So yeah, that idea of self-control is what we're talking about here. And so this is termed ego depletion. This idea of controlling yourself, system 2 monitoring behavior, system 2 constraining this impulsive desire of system 1 is taking up all of the energy. So in the same vein as the study I just went over, people eating healthy foods while avoiding temptations later gave up faster in tasks requiring both physical and mental work. So this isn't even necessarily just doing some multiplication problems after utilizing all of your energy on self-control. This is also physical exercise. You become lazy the more you become more lazy the more energy you expend on a different task. Pretty straightforward. The interesting thing is that this isn't just sprinting and then later someone asking you to do 20 push-ups. This is control your impulses, later perform this math equation. So it's really interesting to look at all of these studies and understand that when we're talking about self-control, we're literally talking about mental work that we're putting forth on a task at hand. So we're going to go over some of these primers that were given as examples in this book. This is by far my favorite chapter in terms of not only understanding the systems at hand, but kind of just understanding basic psychology and unconscious factors that go into decision making. Unconscious being, we have no idea this is happening. This is something that's going on in the background that's influencing our behavior that we're not even aware of, right? So in several of these experiments, people were primed. And what priming is there's kind of information going on in the background that you're not necessarily aware of the cause of. You might not even register it consciously. Nonetheless, unconscious aspects of your brain are picking up on this information and utilizing it in order to make a decision later on. And again, all of this is going on unconsciously. So to the left, you see stacks of money. Having seen that, you are now primed in the same way that the people in the studies were primed. This money is going into decision making in the future, even though you're somewhat aware of the fact that you're now money primed. You're still money primed. It doesn't matter. So as a result of looking at this money, you're now more likely to have individualistic qualities. You're more self-reliant as a result. So um, in these studies, they had things like posters with money on it, Monopoly money kind of strewn about in the background, or a computer screensaver with money on it, right? And so you might catch a glimpse of a screensaver with money on it, not think anything of it, but at the same time, an actor in the study drops pens and pencils, you're less likely to help that person pick up pencils. And if you do, you're going to pick up less pencils than you would have if you didn't see that money. So the association of money, what it means culturally, and what the impact of money has on your unconscious plays a role in your behavior down the road, despite you maybe not even remembering that you had seen the money on the screensaver, seen the Monopoly money strewn on a desk in the background of the experiment area. Um, so yeah, more interesting things in terms of money priming. They spent longer time on average solving difficult problems, and they were less likely to someone help an actor in the experiment who was pretending to have issues understanding one of um so uh more priming examples, in authoritarian governments, a lot of the time they will have pictures of the dictator everywhere, and this is in order to dampen any individualism. It's a constant reminder that Big Brother's watching you, or that like, hey, listen, we are subservient to this dictator. Remember that unconsciously. Therefore, the civilians will be less likely to act out. They know the people know these things and they utilize these things. And then another example of kind of an unconscious primer is there was a coffee shop that had kind of a courtesy bucket. So, here's coffee, tea, and milk. Take what you would like and give the amount of money that you deem is to be necessary, right? So in the background, some weeks they would have pictures of flowers, and other weeks they would have pictures of people's eyes. And you see, looking at the graph, these black dots represent weeks in which they had pictures of people's eyes, and they're skewed way to the right, which is indicating that people spent much more money on days where there was this unconscious primer of eyes watching you. And then a third example is people being asked to remember something in which they felt ashamed of. So just if you're interested in doing the experiment, think of an instance where you acted out in maybe like an immature way in a social situation, something that kind of brings on a feeling of like embarrassment and shame, right? And then fill in these blanks. All right. And then, so fill in these blanks. If you remembered the feeling of shame, you were more likely to fill in these blanks with wash and soap rather than wish and soup. So that's kind of just a symbolic representation of a feeling of shame. And what that means is, like dirty. You can kind of look into Freud's work to understand why that might be. All right. So system 1 is a machine for jumping to conclusions. So another little experiment you can participate in right now is just literally looking at this first picture, in the middle of which is Anne approached the bank. So what you most likely saw to the left is A, B, and C. What you most likely saw to the right is 12, 13, 14. What you didn't notice, however, is that 13 and B are the exact same shape. It's copy and pasted into the middle. And you can now see A, 13C, 12B, 14. But for reasons that we're going to get into, you didn't see those at first. You only saw A, B, and C, 12, 13, 14. You didn't even stop to consider an alternative solution. It didn't even cross your mind to go, well, maybe there's a different way to look at this. The reason that is because system 1 came online, saw A, B, C, and system 2 didn't have the energy expenditure in order to check system 1's work. It didn't know that was a necessary step to take.
Yeah, system 1's trying to work.
You jumped. Go ahead.
I said system 1 is, in that case, it's trying to work with cognitive ease. So it's not it's fitting the beast, the slash number 13, into the context in which it's situated. So it's not, it's pragmatic in that sense. It's using what makes the most sense.
Yeah, it's the law of least effort. So again, system 2's job is to check system 1's work, but it kind of has to have the go ahead to do that. If it doesn't think it's necessary, it's not going to go ahead and check that work. So in a similar vein, the lines of A and B in the middle here, those are the same length, right? But you do not see them as the same length. But if you took a ruler and measured them, you would see them to be the same, right? So what this is system 1 looking at this and going, line B is longer, line A is shorter. System 2's work. And this is a reoccurring aspect of the book later on, which is WYSIAT. What you see is all there is. So system 1 uses the information that it has and nothing more. It, a lot of the time, doesn't even ask questions to determine if there's more information that's needed. It just kind of uses what it has and moves forward from there. It doesn't expend the energy that would be necessary in order to check its own work.
Correct. Yeah. It's in that case, in the case of the lines, Kahneman talked about you trusting. In that case, you rationally understand the lines are of equal length. However, so you're trusting in something that instinctively or impulsively doesn't appear to be correct, even though you know it to be true. So that has a lot of implications. And like he implied this in what was the term he used for it? Cognitive deception. It was something along the lines. In the case of a human interaction, there's something called psychopathic charm, where a patient will bounce from doctor to doctor and explain to the doctor that they have now how they just weren't the right one. They misunderstood them, but now this person, you as the doctor, or you truly understand me, and so you're the one to get me. And doctors can fall for that charm, and so Kahneman was advised to avoid this type of patient at all costs, despite the fact that impulsively, instinctively, you like this person, but you know that they follow a certain pattern of psychopathy.
Right. yeah, your system one sees the signs of a charming individual who's looking for help, and system two doesn't come online to check that work and to understand that the behavior that this psychopath is exhibiting is textbook stay away from this patient. They're attempting to manipulate you for their own gain. And despite the fact that you know this, you might still be in the same way that even though you know the two lines are the same length, you're still tempted to see B is longer. The only reason you don't say that B is longer is because system two knows rationally that it is not. You've proven it to yourself that this is wrong. You've used means outside of your own perception in order to understand it for what it is. But nonetheless, you still see it for what system one wants it to see it as.
Right. Yep.
All right, so back to facial expressions. So system one utilizes facial expressions automatically. And this is an evolutionary trait that we've picked up from however many millions of years as a social species, right? We can see dominance, we can see anger, happiness, charm. We can see the emotions of the people in front of us by looking at their face and understanding what their face has to say to us. We do this automatically in the same way that you saw the woman on the first slide as angry. You see the people around you as happy and as dominant, as someone to stay away from. And you don't use any kind of effort to do this. It happens as a result of an instinct that's programmed inside of you. And so this has pretty extreme consequences in today's society because, going back to the case of a psychopath, if they're savvy enough, they can manipulate their own facial expressions in order to make you become unassuming of whatever it is that they're interested in like manipulating you in order to do. If they're actually domineering and unagreeable, they can come off as someone who's not dangerous whatsoever if they want to, right? And nonetheless, your system one will come online and go, oh, this person's smiling at me, they must not be dangerous. Probably not true. So this guy named Alex Todorov conducted a study that illuminates this a little better than I just did, which is he had participants look at a series of pictures. And what the participants didn't know is that these people were either running for office or had already run for office, right? And so they were given pictures of these faces, sometimes for as little as 1/10 of a second, and asked the people to kind of gauge their likability. How competent do these people appear? How good of a leader will these people be? And the interesting results of these studies is that even though they were only looking at these pictures of faces for a brief period of time, they didn't have any information outside of the picture, they predicted the elected official 70% of the time. So what does that tell us? That shows us that when we're doing things like electing officials or forming opinions of people, voting for a president, we are a lot of the time not taking into account actually important information. We're looking at this person's face, and if their face tells us that they have traits and characteristics that are important to us on a more primitive level, that we like them better, right?
They would have been.
You broke up.
I was saying, yeah, like when they would, the facial characteristics and their appearance would have been more important in a evolutionary sense, and like in a sense of favorable offspring or um, yeah, health, so physical health, stuff like that, which is why it's
Right.
embedded in us.
Yeah, which is I'm sure at some point that was a great capacity for our brains to have, but in a situation as complex as this as the leadership of a country or a state, it's obsolete. It doesn't help us anymore. And at the same time, we're utilizing this property of system one without even understanding that that's what we're doing. So voters who are just looking at, they're just like watching TV and, looking at the facial expressions of the candidates as well as their, body posture and, the tone of voice, everything like that. Like you can look at Trump's candidacy as an aspect of this where, he's learning these hand gestures, uh, these kinds of things that illuminate the fact that he's a dominant male, right? And so a huge portion of the population is going to, without getting into politics and dividing our audience here, a huge portion of our population is going to look at that and say, that's a dominant male. The dominant male should be in charge. They don't know that that's what they're doing, but they're damn well not looking into the policies of the individual. They're just watching the individual on TV going, okay, this person has this body posture, this characteristic, this ability to come off as a dominant individual. Therefore, they should be in charge. That's their system one looking at this and understanding that, well, thinking that it understands who should be in charge without utilizing properties like statistically what's their policy, statistically how well will their policy work, what do they stand for, who should really be in charge in terms of the complicated situation like a government. That's they might think that's what they're doing, and it's not even just with presidency. This is in turn. This is in the workplace. This is in a stranger approaching you on the street. You see their face, and at a glance, you think that you've determined who's a friend and who's a foe. But in reality, this is just a trick that evolution has played.
I concur.
So yeah, that is the slides. That's the general information for what system one and system two are, and some experiments that kind of highlight the different attributes of the two systems. So what do you think of part one so far? Are you excited for the rest of the book?
Yeah, I am, and I think a lot of what we read grafted onto a lot of similar concepts, a lot of similar dichotomies you read about. Whether it's, we humans have this pattern, this notion of patterning things into twos and like wanting to reconcile the opposites. Anyone who listened to us, Landon and I, speak on Psychology and Alchemy, a book written by Carl Jung, know that the reconciliation of opposites is like a fundamental theme of the alchemical process and self-development, which I think shows in this sense here, where we have the conceptualization of two systems of thinking and highlighting the faults that can become of each one. Highlighting that ultimately to achieve like a flow state, which is optimal performance, we have to find ways to um, integrate the maximal amount of efficiency with the least amount of energy expended. And that's kind of what Kahneman is explaining here. And also that we're going to see that system one is what we've kind of grown out of in terms of growing system two over that. In more recent times of our development, of our evolution, we've gained the capacity to think logically and rationally. But whereas system one's more embedded in us, hence why it's so natural to us and why we're so much more natural inclined to think impulsively, think with stereotypes and prejudices, and have these biases and stuff like that. Um, However, more and more over time, as we grow our awareness, we're learning to grow our own conscious faculties and grow our ability to, not only observe our system one, but also to incrementally become more more an agent, more of our own agents, as less of agents of our biological inheritance from the past. And that's the main thing I got from reading this passage.
Yeah. And it gives a lot of thought in terms of just kind of this maps onto philosophy and sociology as well as psychology, just kind of understanding the way in which different forms of government, politics, and behavior are influenced by these different components of our brain, and how unwilling we are to utilize system two, even though in most situations it is a better route to take, to think through and to use effort in order to come to a correct conclusion, instead of falling back on some kind of bias that we inherited from either our culture or our evolution and ancestors. And it's interesting in a more concrete way, outside of mere theory. You can use this framework to like literally feel which system that you're using. Like right now, I feel that I'm using system two, right? This is, you know, I'm having to utilize a ton of energy in order to speak coherently and to draw information out of the book and abstract on it and explain it, right? Um, but in a lot of circumstances, it's more tempting to utilize less energy and to just think things through based on intuition. And what I'm looking forward to learning more about the kind of pitfalls that intuition provides in terms of normal everyday life. Like we see facial expressions as one of those things, judging people not on genuine characteristics and policy or morals, but do they look like a dominant ape? You know, it's that's just like one example, as well as kind of looking at what career a meek and tidy soul would fall into, right? And it's a little bit of a shock to kind of see like how often you are being lazy. And a lot of the examples, like he gave the example of, a ball and a bat costs $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than $1. How much does the ball cost? And it was just like, I was thinking about it. I mean, I know he's
$1 more than the ball.
what?
The bat costs $1 more than the ball. You said the bat costs $1 more than $1.
It's my system.
Quit being lazy.
My bad, bro. Any more glucose? But it's funny to read through it and like feel myself being lazy and know that I could do those 10 push-ups of energy that it would require to come to that conclusion. But it's like I'm just going to read on and find the answer. It's like I know he's setting me up to give the intuitive response of 10 cents. At the same time, I know that's wrong. I'm not really willing to stop myself from being mentally lazy.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to kind of like, I guess, rebut against that is like, yes, it is, it is lazy in a sense. However, one of the functions of consciousness is to like narrow our focus and to eliminate anything extraneous that in terms of like how we go about achieving our goals, or like how we go about setting up our environment around us. What we see is important. We have to set things to the side, some things to the side in a sense, because we can't consciously, we can't like come to terms with the complexity of everything. So that laziness in a sense it helps in that sense. But yes, I see what you're saying, where we like to revert to that inherent state of energy maintenance, which can sometimes be at the expense of uh, you know like certain consequences that can be even dire sometimes.
What I'm curious to see if he touches on later on in the book is, like, in the same way that, like, the more push-ups you do, the easier it is to do push-ups. I wonder if the more you're utilizing system 2 consciously, and you're literally like attempting to think things through more often rather than falling back on system 1. I wonder if it becomes easier to utilize system 2 in the same way it becomes easier to utilize a muscle.
I would certainly agree with that. And I'm sure we'll read that as we go along. And so for anyone listening to this and they're interested in learning more about this, I'd say one, listen to the future parts coming up, but also something you can take away with now is just gradually increase your awareness of becoming become more mindful of, say you're trying to eliminate a certain habit, or you're trying to improve something aspect of your life. You'll notice, try to become more aware of times where you revert to that old habit, and where say, okay, what was I thinking here? Why am I actually going back to doing this? Because it could just be a part of your programming of the past, where you were used to performing in a certain way, and so you're being lazy in that sense and wanting to just maintain energy and revert to what you've been doing previously, when in fact you're trying to change, which does require energy.
Mhm. Yeah, and it brings up a lot of questions regarding something like intelligence. We touched on it a little bit, but it really begs the question of whether intelligent people are more capable of utilizing more rational faculties and expending more energy in order to come to conclusions, or if it's just merely kind of the way that we think about well, at least I think about intelligence, which is like you're kind of given intelligence. It's something that you inherit, and it's a property of how well your brain works. Is it a property of how well your brain works, or is it a property of how willing you are to utilize aspects of your brain that are more capable of doing high level thinking? I just that's just kind of it, like something like IQ is something that I'm pretty interested in.
Mhm.
Uh, I'm obviously a huge stimulus for this channel is to become smarter. This is not necessarily to like help others become smarter, but like for myself, like I want to expend energy devoted towards learning, right? I don't really care if anyone else learns as a result. That's what I'm attempting to do by, reading and analyzing these books. So in doing that, am I increasing my IQ by utilizing system 2 in order to read and understand material as well as convey it in a coherent fashion? Or am I just kind of destined and stuck in the capacities of my system 2 that I was born with?
Yeah, I mean, regardless of like how IQ is measured and the metrics of it, there's certainly a beneficial effect in terms of knowledge acquisition and and having a practice like this, or in the general practice of increasing your consciousness of wanting to change a certain way, or to adopt a certain trait or something. Regardless of how it's measured by statisticians or doctors, regardless of the results, that should not deter you, because there is certainly some type of response to it and some beneficial effect that we just can't measure yet. Where we're not measuring properly. So, yeah. That said, my brain glucose is pretty shot at the moment. So I
Yeah,
think I'm about
this
to pump it up.
these videos are always exhausting, and I guess now we understand why. So
Yeah.
Thank you for anyone tuning in. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Share this with your friends and keep the Self-Wired platform growing.
Yeah. Stay wired, my friends.
Thank you.